driving, and there was schedules to shift, and there were children to pawn off on relatives and friends that you might not even be friends with when you go home and collect your children. But you prioritize being here, so I think round of applause is in order. It's impossible that no one knows who you are. It's impossible, right? Krazy Ketos.
We actually have to use our channel about 4 years ago. We each lost over 100 pounds on keto. We've been morbidly obese our entire life.
Our entire life. Middle school was awesome. Who
And we are on a mission to change lives, one person at a time. We have always said to everybody, if we can change one life, doing what we do is worth it. And so we appreciate everybody for being here, prioritizing your health. You're going to learn a lot. What I want to know is, are you a team ribeye or are you a team New York strip?
Oh, everybody here is ribeye. If you are team ribeye, clap your hands. All right.
And you're a team New York strip. You like the leaner cut, but you still want a little bit of fat. Is there anybody?
All right. You made a few friends. I'm excited for you. Because team ribeye! Yeah, all right. So, speaking of beef, and that is one of our favorite topics, right? I could talk about beef all day long. Binion Beef is here, and they're going to be giving away a box of beef. Are you excited? And you are actually already entered to win that box of beef just by being present here today. What other conference in your life or event have you ever been like, I hope they pick me for a big box of meat to take home? I can't wait for that plane ride, right? Like just straddling that.
I seem to remember somebody flying home with a box of hamburgers. So it would be better to fly home with a box of beef.
I am unashamed. They were delicious hamburgers, right? So we're super thankful for all of the vendors that are here. Yep. A special thanks to Keto Chow. Can we give it up for Chris and Miriam? How amazing is this couple? When I was getting in the shower at 5 a.m. and they were leaving at 5 a.m., I thought, wow, nobody has more of an investment in this community here today than Chris and Miriam. I'm so thankful that they almost crazily invited us to MC because you just don't know, right?
You don't know what's going to come out of Rachel's mouth.
You
so
don't.
Rachel, we family atmosphere.
Right.
We're live on YouTube.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for everybody on YouTube for watching. And I want you to know that I know we have so many balls in the air today. And I do not intend to drop any balls and not do my part. So you don't worry.
You've already missed it.
You don't worry.
So if you are, thank you everybody who's joining us on YouTube. So if you didn't know, if you're here and you know somebody who couldn't get them, know that they couldn't get here, they're live on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
The entire conference is being streamed for free on YouTube. If you are on there, chat amongst yourselves in the live chat. Excuse me. It's been a long weekend. But we really are excited. We have amazing speakers.
Yes.
We're going to start off with someone who I call him Mr. Salt.
Yes.
Because if you ever go out to eat with him,
bring 2 salt shakers, one for him.
Well, not
and
just
one
the
for
salt.
everybody
You
else.
can't show up with one of the little Redmond vials.
No,
Which,
that's
by
a
the way,
baby
if
salt.
you didn't know, those little tiny travel along vials, which that's how much salt you should eat in a day, they are still hand filled by hand by a person at Redmond, which is kind of insane. This guy, you need to bring like the big 10-ounce container because he's going to eat that much salt on his steak.
Yes.
So
He's living
I'm
right.
excited to introduce this person. If you want to know about cholesterol, if you are worried about having high cholesterol, if you are Rachel that has a 500 LDL.
Can I get a hand clap for that? That is amazing.
If you want to know, like, hey, is this okay? this is the guy who you want to listen to.
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
So his name is Dave Feldman.
Yes, and I brought cards to read credentialing, right? Because we are not doctors, and we are not nurses,
We're not?
and we are not health professionals. No, we're way too crazy. No.
Okay.
But we want to make sure that we honor all of their credentialing because we do have professionals in this space today, and we want to honor that. So Dave Feldman, who's going to be speaking up first, is a senior software engineer and entrepreneur. He began working with programming and system engineering at a very young age and has always enjoyed learning new patterns and concepts. After starting a low-carb diet, Dave found his cholesterol numbers increased considerably. I found that to be true also. He then began reverse engineering the lipid system through self-experimentation and testing, finding it was very dynamic and fluid. He has now demonstrated this multiple times by moving his cholesterol up and down substantially in a matter of days. Here to share with us the new papers, the coming study, where we go next, and why it matters, it's our honor to present Dave Feldman.
How's everyone doing? Okay, so good news, bad news. The bad news is this may be the least prepared I've ever had for any presentation. Some of my fellow speakers know. The good news is the reason why is because actually I've been assembling a video abstract for a paper that nobody knows about yet. It actually just got released and we haven't talked about it. I'm about to talk about it now. But that video abstract will be getting premiered here for the first time. You'll be the first audience that actually sees it. Yes. Okay, so the new papers, the coming study, where we go next, and why it matters. My conflicts of interest, of course, have membership and Patreon revenue. It's not amazing, but it actually is very relevant because it's helping us out with the research. And of course, I'm a partner and managing director at Own Your Labs. Just curious, for those of you in the audience, how many have never heard of me before actually coming here? Just show of hands. Ah, great. All right. Thank you. We've got a few over there. Now, how many people didn't actually find out about myself or my work before the pandemic? Show of hands. Okay. Now, lastly, how many people have actually known about me since about 2017? Show of hands. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's somewhat good news because that has allowed us to propagate this research quite a bit, which I'll get into in just a moment. But before we can talk about the new papers, we have to go back to that fateful year, to 2017. Now, I'm curious, is this a familiar image to any of you? Yes. Show of hands? Yes. Yes, okay. So, at that time, in July of 2017, just to take you back, I was writing about kind of an awkwardly named thing I called lean mass hyperresponders. The term hyperresponders predates me coming into the space, and it was in reference to those people who go on a low-carb diet but see their cholesterol go up. Not a little bit, but substantially, say 50%, 100% or more. And what I found was there did seem to be a pattern that also seemed to exist for those people where they also tend to be leaner, a little bit more athletic, and also see their HDL go up and their triglycerides go down. And it was basically pattern recognition that I saw to the point that I finally decided to write this article because at around the same time I was starting to put together the basics of the lipid energy model. But I have to tell you, when I was putting this together, I really had no idea just how accurate this actually would be. This was really the first presentation of the hypothesis itself, effectively saying, hey, here's what I think may be going on. I'd be curious what the community says. And I have to tell you, I was quite ready for a whole lot of other people coming back saying, no, this is wrong. My BMI is very high, I'm more metabolically challenged, and yet I have this profile. But rather, instead, this actually ended up being one of the most commented on posts that we've ever put in Cholesterol Code. I actually just looked last night, it's at 919 comments. It's because so many people kept coming in saying, no, this is me. This is actually describing me to a T. And I've been very curious to find out more about it. So this was actually a pivotal moment for us. And now, with that in mind, we can go to the new papers. flash forward to November of 2021, and we have finally published the Lean Mass Hyperresponder paper. And there it is. By the way, you can look this up right now. If you go to cholesterolcode.com/LMHR, you'll actually find a link to quite literally the first paper that my name is on. It's kind of cathartic, by the way, to have it up there. And it kind of comes, thank you. And it kind of comes in two categories of data. The first is the web survey. The Cholesterol Super Survey is publicly available ongoing questionnaire created by co-author DF, that's me, in January 2020 with the aim of describing changes in LDL cholesterol among consumers of a carbohydrate-restricted diet. The survey, advertised through social media, includes questions about height, weight, dietary intake, medications, current and past lipid test results. So really, that was the point in which I said, I really need to get a survey up. My profile is growing enough to where I can hopefully get a lot more out there on social media. I'm going to circulate it through our new Cholesterol Code and Lean Mass Hyperresponder Facebook groups and just try to get everybody to answer as much as possible. And that created a great basis of data. So then I got to put together with my co-authors perhaps one of my favorite charts ever. And this is actually what you can see is 3 axes. And I kind of want to take a moment to explain this. These are of the participants that met our criteria of being on a carb-restricted diet, which was 130 grams or less. And what you can see here on this axis, this is the x-axis, is body mass index. And as body mass index is at the highest over here, going to the lowest, you can see the change in LDL cholesterol generally increasing. This also applies on the other axis, on the z-axis. As you go further back, prior, as in what you started with before going on the diet, prior triglyceride to HDL-C ratio, likewise had an impact on the likely change in your LDL cholesterol. So the lowest number we have here is 35, which is those folks who had the highest BMI and had the highest triglyceride to HDL ratio. Conversely, for those folks who had the lowest BMI and who started before going on the diet with the lowest triglyceride to HDL ratio, this 135, this isn't what their LDL cholesterol would end up being. It's the change, the net change in their LDL cholesterol. That really substantiated in a very strong way just how much this effect is very predictive. This I really like too. This is our figure 3, and it goes a little bit more in depth because you can actually see this divided up into different distributions. So you can see in blue the lean mass hyperresponders, and you can see in red the non-lean mass hyperresponders. And we went ahead and also put in NHANES, which is from the CDC. That's just kind of a general population distribution that we could pull in. And if you look in the top left quadrant, you can see that they're almost all together, right? In fact, the mean, as in you could say the tip of the hump on both the lean mass hyperresponders and the non-lean mass hyperresponders are nearly identical. In fact, the lean mass hyperresponders had slightly lower mean LDL cholesterol. I want to say it's around 133, 134, something like that. Whereas for those that are the non-lean mass hyperresponders, is around 135. Yet, we see going to the upper right quadrant, you can actually see just how much this changes after they go on the diet. And note that scale. It's going from 0 to 800 LDL-C, LDL cholesterol. You can see just how much lean mass hyperresponders show that response, how big it goes. Right below that, though, you can also see what happens with HDL cholesterol. Now, of course, HDL cholesterol being at 80 milligrams per deciliter or higher is part of the definition for lean mass hyperresponders. So, of course, they start at a higher level. But you can see just how pronounced that change still is after they've gone on the low-carb diet. We also had a case series. This is patients presenting to the clinic of co-author TK, that, by the way, is Dr. Tro, with a history of elevated LDL cholesterol following initiation of a very low-carb ketogenic diet containing less than 25 grams of carbs a day. Now, they've had no personal history of myocardial infarction or stroke, where initially counseled on a standard of care. this, and Dr. Tro always wants me to be sure that I mention this, he always tells them standard of care. You can choose medication, and many do, in order to manage having higher levels of LDL cholesterol. But he then had some patients in this series, and these are the ones that we report on, who would instead opt to pursue an empiric clinician-supervised dietary therapy with reintroduction of 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day in the form of fruits or starchy vegetables. If you remember that poster from a few slides ago, you notice how I mentioned glycogen stores. Glycogen stores are stored glucose. And stored glucose, especially in your liver, is very relevant to us with the lipid energy model because we believe that if you have enough hepatic glycogen stores, there's less of a need for your body to traffic around that dietary fat, or the endogenous fat. And then, of course, there's also the cholesterol that ride shares with it. So with the reintroduction of a modest amount of carbohydrates, again, 50 to 100, right, we can actually see that change in their patients. So over here you see pre-very low-carb diet. These are the different patients. This is IA, MI, RO, NM. You can see what their total and LDL were before having gone on a very low-carb diet. You can see it increases substantially, multifold. And then with the introduction of carbohydrates, taking them from a very low-carb diet to just a low-carb diet, you can see just how far down it goes. You can see this decrease over here. You can see just how far down it goes down with each patient. So to cut to the chase, here's the good news. The good news from our paper is this. If you're concerned about LDL cholesterol, and many are, and many should be respected for their concern of LDL cholesterol, then if you're coming from a more challenged state and your BMI is much higher and your triglyceride to HDL ratio isn't that great, it's highly unlikely you'll see that big of a change in your LDL cholesterol. Conversely, if you're lean, if you're fit, if you're more athletic, it's probably more likely you will see this hyper response. But again, if you and your doctor are uncomfortable with that, you can take action by moving from a very low-carb diet to a low-carb diet. That's a lot of what our paper helps to show. Now, this part I'm pretty proud of, and I'm happy to actually be able to talk about this on stage. Remember how I feel about open science. And you can see tweets that I say about this. I both compliment David Ludwig and Kevin Hall whenever it is that they release their data and all of the analysis that goes around it. I'll even make tweets like this one where I talk about how I'm optimistic that in the future this is going to be a lot more common. Well, I'm happy to say with this paper, when we published the uncorrected proof of the LMHR paper, we immediately released all the code and anonymized data in the exact same time. Our paper wasn't just for the eyes of a few reviewers in private. It was available without precondition to our biggest critics as well. Everybody could review our work and our data, find anything we overlooked and could do better, and provide feedback in real time. Thank you. Now, don't get me wrong, not every research team I'm working with may hold to this standard in the exact same way, and I don't want to tie my own hands from working with them. But I will say you can absolutely count on me to work toward the maximum transparency on these crucial questions. Look, I know I've said this many times before, both on stage and off. I'm such a fan of open science, and honestly, I feel like it's where a lot of our problems have taken us, unfortunately. Okay, so the new lean mass hyperresponder case study has just dropped. Actually, it dropped yesterday. We haven't said anything about it yet. But the video abstract drops right now. So let's go ahead and cue the video abstract. Hope you guys are ready over there. You ready? Here we go. This is about 7 minutes long, so you know.
In a recent paper, we discuss how some individuals see increased cholesterol levels after going on a low-carb diet. In fact, this seems closely related to how lean these individuals are alongside common markers for good metabolic health. This brings up some very big questions. Just how high can cholesterol levels go in this situation? Is it likely the leanest of these folks are just consuming the most saturated fat? And perhaps most importantly, would we find development of heart disease in the most extreme cases? Well, I'm happy to say we've just released a new comprehensive case study that may give us some interesting data on all these questions and more. Before we get started, I need to give a couple of important disclaimers. 1, this video does not constitute medical advice. And 2, we remind viewers that existing guidelines in major institutions focused on heart disease strongly advise against high cholesterol levels. Our case study centers around a 26-year-old male who adopted a ketogenic diet to manage severe ulcerative colitis. This diet strategy has worked remarkably well for his treatment, but it also resulted in a substantial increase in his LDL cholesterol, a well-regarded risk factor for heart disease. However, he likewise saw his HDL cholesterol rise and triglycerides fall, and these are 2 markers associated with a low risk of heart disease. We discussed this triad of high LDL, high HDL, and low triglycerides in our prior paper around this
Thank you. Thank you. So we have the technical folks jumping in on this one. Yes, so actually this is a case study. We have released it. I do want to wait until the video finishes out before I talk about it too much more. But did anyone have any questions on the prior study that we had before with the LMHRs that we also did that got released in November? Actually, sorry, the uncorrected proof got released in November, and I believe the final version came out in February, which was pretty cool. Yes, go ahead.
Was there anything that people submitted that you ended up correcting?
Yes, I'm actually glad you brought that up. So Siobhan, my business partner, of course, and good collaborator. Oh, sorry, I'll repeat her question. So she asked, was there anything that came from having released all of the data and the code that actually resulted in corrections on our part? And I'm happy to say yes, because actually the community was able to pitch in and find some things, for example, some very obscure duplicates in some of the data that we couldn't easily find. And so the crowd-sourced changes came back. We accepted them all, and we were very appreciative of it. And for that matter, this is one of the things I often hear is folks are concerned about releasing their data because I'll hear phrases like, I don't want to do that because you're going to just try to find and poke holes in it. The whole point of releasing the data is so that you can poke holes in it, right? If there's problems with the data or the analysis, or for that matter, if somebody else can come to a better form of the analysis, that's not a bad thing. A lot of times, that's exactly what you're wanting to have happen. It is a bit understandable why you'd want to feel like you would have control of the data that you worked hard to assemble and get together. But the bottom line is, we really all want to have the same goals, right? We all want to accomplish getting to what the real answers are. And for that matter, if there's something that could be found in our data, and I hope many people feel the interest in being able to analyze it, put it together, and work with it in different ways, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Any other questions? Yes.
Is this study published in any scientific or medical journals?
Yes, it's in CDN, Current Developments in Nutrition, is what it's in right now. If you go to cholesterolcode.com/LMHR, it's right there at the top. We have a link right there at the top. And that's actually been our kind of standing informative page up until this point. Anyone else? No? Actually, I tell you what, I have a slide that's toward the end on somebody who I wanted to take a little time to talk about if I had some time. How many of you guys know Sarah Hallberg? Clap if she had an effect on your life. I have a personal story to share. I hope I can say it even keel. It doesn't mess with me for the rest of the speech. But I have to tell you, you may not know this. She directly helped me at the earliest possible stages of my research. In low-carb Vail, I want to say 2016, February of 2016, I had my first 8 blood tests, which I'm sure Siobhan would laugh at because we now know I have something around 140 between all of the different experiments I've done. And I had those first 8, and I had them in a graph, and I was showcasing how consuming more fat would unintuitively bring down LDL cholesterol, and vice versa. And I was taking it around to all the different people, all of the speakers at Low Carb Veil, and nobody knew who I was, and everyone thought I was this crazy engineer. Oh, actually, that's still true. But that I was speaking a lot of gibberish because I kept talking about these ApoBs, and I kept talking about this energy system and how that might be relevant. And I wanted to find the people. I realized pretty quickly, because I had first gone to this mixer that's usually just before the conference, and I realized I was speaking Greek to everybody. So I wanted to find somebody who seemed to know a lot about cholesterol in particular. And it was actually Jason Fung who said, you need to just talk to a lipidologist. You should talk to Sarah. And I was like, Sarah who? He's like, well, Sarah Hallberg, she's amazing. But she wasn't there at the mixer. And then I looked for her the next morning, Friday, the first of the 2 days of the conference. She wasn't there either. And yet she was on the schedule. Well, it turned out that she was just arriving, just to do her talk during her talk slot, and then I had heard that she was going to immediately leave with her family to then go skiing. Because frankly, Low Carb Veil was, and they'll admit this now, was kind of like an excuse, a way for them to get a lot of skiing in while also sharing a lot of interesting information on low carb, right? Well, she did her talk. She was walking down the aisle. This is a true story. And I literally stood up and in the middle of the aisle and kind of blocked her exit from getting back out. Had my laptop ready, and I turned my laptop, and I was like, Sarah, I'd love to be able to talk to you about this. Is there any way, if not now, that we could talk at some later point? And she's like, yeah, what is it you have? And we went off to the back, and I was showing it to, and her family, literally, her husband's like just outside the door, and he's kind of like waiting clearly, and I'm being a real nuisance. And even though she was clearly on her way out, she took the time to listen to what I said more than anybody else. We ultimately scheduled a Zoom, and then following that Zoom, which was, I want to say maybe a month later, because she was very busy then as well, we had a great conversation. And I can proudly say to this day, she has taken several different steps that helped me early on in the research, particularly in connecting with a number of lipidologists. Now, not a lot came of the lipidologists that she knew that she connected me with. However, it was a crucial point in time that I needed to get to understand what it would take for me to ultimately then turn around to do the studies that I'll be telling you about next. Oh, it looks as if the video is set up, but I do want to finish off with this real quick. Sarah Hallberg she was truly one of the good guys. If you've ever had the pleasure of getting to know her personally, I can tell you she's exactly the person she looks like on screen. She's a strong advocate for her patients and for all of us, for low carb and how it's helped so many others. So if I could ask one big round of applause for everything she's done. She's just an incredible human being and a tremendous loss. So back to the video. Here we go.
In a recent paper, we discuss how some individuals see increased cholesterol levels after going on a low-carb diet. In fact, this seems closely related to how lean these individuals are alongside common markers for good metabolic health. This brings up some very big questions. Just how high can cholesterol levels go in this situation? Is it likely the leanest of these folks are just consuming the most saturated fat? And perhaps most importantly, would we find development of heart disease in the most extreme cases? Well, I'm happy to say we've just released a new comprehensive case study that may give us some interesting data on all these questions and more. Before we get started, I need to give a couple of important disclaimers. One, this video does not constitute medical advice. And two, we remind viewers that existing guidelines in major institutions focused on heart disease strongly advise against high cholesterol levels. Our case study centers around a 26-year-old male who adopted a ketogenic diet to manage severe ulcerative colitis. This diet strategy has worked remarkably well for his treatment, but it also resulted in a substantial increase in his LDL cholesterol, a well-regarded risk factor for heart disease. However, he likewise saw his HDL cholesterol rise and triglycerides fall, and these are two markers associated with a low risk of heart disease. We discussed this triad of high LDL, high HDL, and low triglycerides in our prior paper around this profile we refer to as lean mass hyperresponders. And yes, our patient certainly fits this profile as well. Don't worry if you're new to this, we'll post a link to that paper down below. This brings us to the first key question. Just how high can these cholesterol levels go in this situation? In the case of our patient, his LDL levels increased from 95 before the keto diet to as high as 545 milligrams per deciliter at its peak. These levels are rarely seen, save some extreme examples of the genetic disease familial hypercholesterolemia, or FH. And unfortunately, for those born with FH at these levels, there is typically a very rapid development of plaque in the arteries, leading to the onset of clinical heart disease in very early childhood. Notably, the patient also had advanced genetic testing such as whole exome sequencing and heart disease risk assessment, but no genetic mutations were found that could explain these levels. For some further background, in our prior paper, we showed an inverse association between BMI and LDL cholesterol in the context of a low-carb diet. This means it predicted leaner people who would appear to be more likely to develop high LDL on a low-carb diet. We also showed that adding back some carbohydrates could reverse the high LDL. This falls in line with our patient. In an effort to reduce his LDL, he tried on multiple occasions to increase carbohydrate intake and come off his ketogenic diet. But every time he did so, he had a relapse of his inflammatory bowel disease. However, as the inflammatory bowel disease remained in remission and he was able to gain weight, thus increasing his BMI, his LDL cholesterol decreased. Okay, but is it possible this is all just high consumption of saturated fat? Many speculate that these increased levels of LDL cholesterol with low carb can simply be attributed to greater consumption of saturated fat. Yet, as I've just alluded to, this is another area our patient can provide some additional insight. His low-carb diet is more Mediterranean style, with emphasis on fatty seafood, extra virgin olive oil, and low-carb fruits and vegetables. And thus his consumption of unsaturated fat typically exceeded 82% of total fat intake, with saturated fat being less than 18%. However, in his final test of October 2021, he changed his diet to one with a much higher proportion of saturated fat at 45%. Yet this threefold increase in relative saturated fat intake had little impact on resulting LDL cholesterol in the context of his moderate increase in BMI. Simply put, in this patient, BMI dominated over saturated fat and dietary cholesterol consumption in determining LDL levels. Lastly, will these extreme levels of LDL cholesterol demonstrate rapid progression of arterial plaque? Throughout the study period, the patient and his care team were especially interested in assessing his risk. Given available data on FH patients with cholesterol levels this high, there was understandably a concern that at least some detectable plaque would have developed since he began the diet almost 3 years ago. The patient scheduled a CT angiogram, which provides an advanced high-resolution scan for the heart and its surrounding arteries. CCTAs can easily pick up plaque volume even at very small sizes. In the case of our patient, the scan demonstrated no coronary artery disease. All cross-sectional views showed no plaque volume of any kind, and this was confirmed by the independent analysis of 3 different cardiac imaging specialists. But is this surprising or to be expected after only 2.5 years of extremely high LDL? Unfortunately, a limitation of our current science is there are very little CCTA data available for comparison to our patient. However, our case report does cite a published case series including a baby diagnosed with homozygous FH and an LDL of 548, who started multiple medications at around age 2 to lower these levels. With further treatment, his doctors were able to get his LDL to 139, but in spite of these interventions, the patient's first CT angiogram at age 8 identified plaque buildup in multiple arteries. This comparison is interesting because, again, both this homozygous FH patient and our patient had a similar 2-year exposure to LDL levels around 500, and our patient had the additional exposure to normal LDL for over 2 decades of life. And yet, it was the older lean mass hyperresponder patient who exhibited the complete absence of detectable plaque. While these data on our patient are comprehensive and provide potential new insights, they are limited in scope and time span. It's certainly possible this patient is an outlier, or that their progression of plaque will take place later, or many other such possibilities. Even if this risk profile in the short term turns out to be in striking contrast to those with FH, it only further underscores the need for more research on this phenomenon overall. Fortunately, there is also an upcoming prospective study for 100 lean mass hyperresponders that will likewise employ CT angiography. There's a lot more in this case study than we cover here, so be sure to read it from the link in the description down below. And, as always, thank you for watching.
So I'm curious, if when we release papers, we had a likewise video such as this, do you think you would like the paper, the researchers a little bit more? This is something Nick Norwitz and I have actually discussed quite a bit, and we're going to see if we can actually do this a bit more often. We think that the extra work will help to further communicate beyond just putting it into a journal, actually being able to get it to translate to everybody else as well. Okay, so again, the highlights for this case study. LDL-C increased from 95 to 545 milligrams per deciliter on a keto diet with this patient, with an over 4-to-1 unsaturated to saturated fat ratio. I hope you all have caught that. This patient actually consumes a more Mediterranean-style diet. The increased BMI correlated with decreased LDL cholesterol, even with a higher saturated fat. So that one phase where he had a threefold increase in saturated fat, that didn't change his LDL. It tracked much closer to his BMI. And no genetic abnormalities found to explain this phenotype. Again, his LDL was below 100 even before this had started. But the CT angiogram at 2.5 years showed no plaque. Now, as I said in the video, and as I'll say again, this should still be treated with caution. We should still say that while this is an incredible finding, it could be that this is an outlier, and it could be that there could be plaque that would show up later. But that said, this has been pretty fascinating because this was a very high-resolution CT angiogram. Okay, so the coming study. By now, hopefully nobody is left in this room who hasn't heard about this. We've got two organizations, two sets of responsibilities for the lean mass hyperresponder study out of Lundquist. We're handling the funding, recruitment, and travel arrangements under the Citizen Science Foundation. And thank you once again for everybody who's been able to contribute. And of course, the Lundquist Institute has been able to handle the participant examination, the blood work, and the CT scanning. And this is why you're seeing me still putting out a lot of tweets and graphics like this one. I want you for the study. So, if you're watching this right now and you haven't yet seen this page, please go to citizensciencefoundation.org/study if, indeed, you meet these tweets, right? This is, like I said, I'm putting this out on all kinds of social media, anywhere I can, because we haven't fully hit our recruitment goals yet. So if you've had an LDL cholesterol go from 160 and below, right, to 190 and above, and whatever the difference is between those two, it's at least a 50% increase. That qualifies so long as you also have an HDL of 60 or higher and triglycerides of 80 or lower. You, of course, do need to be US-based, and we do have some other criteria, but those are the majors. So if you or somebody you know meet that, then look at the second tweet. You get free low-dose CT angiography, you get free genetic testing, and of course you get free wide-spectrum blood work to assess risk. So this is the crucial data we're collecting and why it matters. We're tracking plaque. It's assumed the vast majority of people have some degree of overall plaque progression, atherosclerosis, over time. Capturing plaques by CT angiograms at one point in time, and again at a later point in time, gives us enormous insight into the overall progression levels of atherosclerosis. To be sure, high-resolution CTA longitudinal data has mainly been collected on high-risk populations, not on low-risk population. But this gives us plenty to work with. We'll have powerful data when combined with single scan studies of both high and low-risk populations for comparison. Again, remember the example of familial hypercholesterolemia and how rapidly we see increased plaque levels for that context. So, consider this. Less than 3% of the US population, less than 3%, has an LDL cholesterol of 190 milligrams per deciliter or higher. Given lean mass hyperresponders have LDL cholesterol in the top 3% of the US population, it would commonly be expected they would likewise have high progression of atherosclerosis since it's at the highest third of the general population. Or, conversely, where lean mass hyperresponders have LDL cholesterol in the top 3%, it would run counter to conventional expectation to observe a low progression of atherosclerosis, such as in the lowest third of the population. This is why I keep bringing it back to the question of magnitude. Plainly stated, a high magnitude of plaque progression is easy to detect with CT image comparison in a very short span of time. Many existing studies have demonstrated this. And while we will certainly be looking at many more aspects of these plaques, their overall progression, especially at the aggregate level, at a population level, will provide powerful evidence regarding magnitude of expected risk. Now, interestingly, as we get closer to the study, there have been many who predicted lean mass hyperresponders will demonstrate a low progression of atherosclerosis, but speculate their progression would be even lower were every risk factor the same, save low LDL cholesterol rather than high. In other words, listen carefully, lean mass hyperresponders would be low risk, but suboptimal when compared to the lowest possible risk. Given our study doesn't have a control, it is unlikely to provide much in the way of answering this speculation if the plaque progressions were low enough to suggest this. So consider this. If we go back to the early 1970s with Doctors Brown and Goldstein, they saw a pivotal patient that, in their words, actually determined the scientific course of the rest of our lives. The patient was a little girl with homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, and she had a total cholesterol of around 850 with an LDL of 783. It's heartbreaking, but she had angina and xanthomas at age 3. And she had a heart attack, her first heart attack at age 6. These are many of the children who are born with FH. It's compelling. It's compelling to see when this is happening and to know that this is the odds of getting FH is 1 in a million. In the words of Dr. Goldstein, this little girl had only an elevated LDL. She had no high blood pressure, she had no diabetes, she didn't smoke, she didn't have a type A personality. Her only risk factor for having a heart attack at age 6 was this high level of LDL. So it's one of the best examples of a disease where we really know the cause. The cause of the disease in this little girl is an increased level of her LDL. Now, the reason I'm really pressing on both of these comparisons, lean mass hyperresponders, homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, is because they're actually the closest, right? But it's all the more reason why we need to get to at least the easiest question to answer, which is the one of magnitude. Is it a big magnitude of effect, which is easy to detect and easy to confirm, or is it a small magnitude effect, which is hard to detect and hard to confirm? Because, plainly stated, if lean mass hyperresponders at the same levels as children with homozygous FH are not seeing a progression of plaque anywhere near as comparable, then you'd have to ask, what is the difference? Maybe there is a difference beyond just LDL. And I don't say that lightly because I don't know the answer to that question. It's why we need to just go get the data. This is, of course, where I was going to be talking about Sarah, but I'm almost out of time. I do just want to say just one more time that she was a very remarkable human being. And we were just so blessed that she found low carb. That's all I'm going to say. I'm so thankful for her. And on that note, special thanks to all the members and patrons of Cholesterol Code, all contributors of the Citizen Science Foundation, all my amazing co-authors for these and coming papers, Siobhan Huggins, who, by the way, I'm so happy was able to join us here today for her tireless work in helping us get here, and to my very good friend and collaborator, Nick Norwitz. And if I could just fit in with just a couple more minutes, if you're not following Nick right now on social media, you need to correct that mistake. He is fantastic, and he has really turbocharged this work to take us to the next level. We have so many great things coming ahead, including the lipid energy model paper, which I'm happy to say is nearing, knock on wood, it's nearing its later stages. Hopefully we're going to be getting into publication here pretty soon. And that's my talk. Once again, please look out for the citizensciencefoundation.org/study and help us meet our recruitment goals. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Dave Feldman. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll take that from you. We are so personally thankful for Dave and Siobhan and everybody over at Own Your Labs because pre-keto, we didn't own our labs. We feared our labs. And I'm so excited for the research that he and his team are doing, and so many in this space, because our children and our grandchildren are going to have a very different experience at the doctor. Are you excited about that? Because I really, really am.
And I do want to encourage you. I know they're not a sponsor, but Dave is awesome.
Yes.
If you do want to get your labs done, maybe you don't want to go through your doctor, go to ownyourlabs.com.
Yes.
Because you can order a lot of blood tests. And honestly, we actually put together a package with them for the lab tests that we did, that Dr. Berry recommended for us when we did beef, butter, bacon, and egg last year.
That was a delicious
And
challenge.
the thing about all of our labs combined, I think it was like $130. That was less than if we would have paid the copay to our insurance company to get those labs done.
Yeah.
So it's a great way that you can help them with their studies and get information for yourself. Also, I wanted to mention out in the vendor booth, make sure you go over to the vendor area during
There's
the
some great
breaks.
vendors out today.
Keto Chow is out there. Nush Cakes is out there. You can get some T-shirts from I'm Keto Strong. Redmond Real Salt's out there. But there's one out there I wanted to mention. It's Vaso Labs. I think it's Vaso Labs. They are offering CIMT scans. And basically, it's like almost like a little bit of a, to put it nicely and without using a lot of technical things.
Okay.
It's like a non-invasive CAC scan. So if you want to see the inside of your arteries and things like that and see like maybe I should go
bet
get
mine
a
has
CAC
glitter.
scan.
I'm pretty sure.
You can go and do that. It's like $100 and it takes 15 minutes. And if you go to your doctor, which most of the time it's not covered by insurance, it's going to cost you like $250 to $300.
Boo.
So you could walk out of here today in 15 minutes knowing what the inside of your arteries look like. You can also find out your vascular age. Like maybe you're like me and you're 50, but I don't know. I'm going to go do it. Maybe my arteries say I'm 20.
I think your arteries
Hopefully
are
they don't
hot.
say I'm 100, right?
I was actually drawn to Joe because of his arteries. That was the look at my
Nice.
arteries.
Yeah, but back then I was 300 pounds.
Yeah, still cute. Still cute.
Thank you.
High five. So, yeah.
I'm excited about the next speaker.
You need to listen to the next speaker, sir. Absolutely. Because we're going to be talking about stress and lack of sleep. It ain't nothing. We can get our diet perfectly, but sleeping.
This is my biggest problem. And I'm
Sleeping
excited.
like
I'm going
a
to be sitting right over
vampire.
there because I, on average, get less than 4 to 5 hours of sleep.
This is
so I
not
know it's my number one
good.
problem.
Yeah.
And so we've got Brian Lenzkes.
Brian Lenzkes.
There we go.
Which we will probably screw up at least 4 more times before
Yes.
we introduce him fully. But Dr. Brian Lenzkes is an internal medicine physician based in San Diego and has focused much of his attention on metabolic disease. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from UC Irvine before attending the University of Southern California School of Medicine, where he graduated in 1999. Dr. Lenzkes, woohoo, I'm so excited, completed his residency at Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego and served as chief resident before joining a private practice. He was a partner in a group practice from 2004 to 2020, but grew increasingly disillusioned with the standard medical model, focusing on disease management rather than a more holistic, patient-centered approach. In 2020, he started his own direct primary care practice called Low-Carb MD in San Diego in order to focus on metabolic disorders and obesity, and he has focused on patient education, and this gets me so excited, and medication de-prescribing. How exciting is that? Can we give it a clap of hands? Medication de-prescribing. I love it for his patients. He also leads community Zoom meetings and regular hikes with his patients in order to provide provide a safe and encouraging environment for patients to support each other as they improve their health. He is co-host of the Low-Carb MD podcast, as well as host of the Life's Best Medicine podcast. He has been a speaker at multiple Low Carb USA events. We're glad he's here today, as well as Low Carb Denver, and has given several lectures for the Nutrition Network. He is passionate about medicine and bringing positive change to the medical community through lifestyle interventions. In his spare time, Dr. Lenzkes loves spending time with his family and friends while hiking or riding his road bike. Most importantly, he is happily married to his high school sweetheart. How cute is this? And has 2 daughters. It is our great honor and privilege to present Dr. Lenzkes.
So, Dr. Lenzkes, can I ask you a quick question, put you on a spot, and throw my wife under the bus at the same time?
I
Since
love
we're
when you
talking
under the
about
bus.
sleep, what are your thoughts on hitting the snooze button 100 times in the
Oh,
morning?
that's
The best thing is if you can wake up without it, but
Oh,
most of us
man.
need it to get up, right?
not 9 times.
Yeah, we all snooze. We all leave our alarms on and wake everyone else up.
Sorry,
but-
Joe.
Hey, it's great to be here. Oh, I need the. It's gonna be hard to. I think I need the advancer. Hopefully, I'll be able to figure this out. So it's great to be here in Utah, everyone. And so we're gonna talk crazy crap this morning. And I just wanted to start out when Dave says a good guy. Dave is the good guy. He's a scientist, and what he's talking about has revolutionized what we're doing in medicine. So we need these scientists. We have to figure out how we each use our skill set and giftings to help each other. So a lot of what Dave has talked about is what we're doing in practice now. So it's pretty awesome to have him. So, gosh, they already did my intro. I don't have to do anything. I really don't have conflict of interest other than one of my podcasts is sponsored by Simply Snacking. But I'm not really pushing their product here, so that doesn't matter. I'm definitely not sponsored by pharma because I like to get people off their meds, right? So for us doctors, our patients are like this huge puzzle we're trying to figure out. There's so many pieces where there's so much baggage we bring with us, childhood experience, all this. So we say, how do we help that person in front of us? So the most complicated part, believe it or not, it is attached to, as some of the doctors will say, this is attached to the bodies, the brain, the heart, how stress affects us, how our self-esteem affects us, self-doubts, all these things when we're going on this journey of changing lifestyle, because it's really hard to do. So which model is it? On Twitter, there's endless debate and fights about, is it calories in, calories out, exercise more, eat less. We've all heard that from our doctors growing up, and it's so frustrating, right? But do calories play a role at some point, right? Carbohydrate insulin model, which most of us are looking at as a majority of what we're doing, saying we really can't just eat 500 calories of gummy bears a day and think we're going to be healthy. We really have to, have a healthy diet. Or is it just bad genes, bad luck? I'm just one of those people, I just got bad luck, right? I got dealt a bad hand, and I can never overcome that. Poor willpower, laziness. A lot of people who are overweight struggle with this, where they'll go ask someone else a question rather than someone who's obese, because they think that they just are lazy and they can't think for themselves. Could it be more complicated? Could there be more to it just than any of these models that we argue about and we fall on our sword about? So this is me growing up. When I was really young, I was pretty healthy weight, but then as you can see, in middle school, you start gaining weight, you start saying, uh-oh, now I'm on this path, right? So fortunately, I started doing sports, so you could see that first picture was my freshman year, and then my junior year. So you could see over time, being in sports, athletics, moving, you could still change, even though I might have been dealt a bad card to start with, I could kind of start overcoming it the right way by lifestyle. And there's me with my high school sweetheart who's here with me today, still. But that was during wrestling season. Oh, hey, Chris, I don't think you started the clock, by the way. So that was during wrestling season. So I in high school, I would go from 205 pounds, because I was short I still am short, but short for a defensive line guy in the middle of the defensive line. So my two best friends were like 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and it's me in the middle, like it would drop like this, right? So I had to put on weight to play, and then I'd have to get down to 165 for wrestling. So those 40 pounds, I would do in like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, like just killing it, right? Doing the biggest loser, worst diet ever. And so this is me. Over the years, I started gaining weight, and I go, it's just, this is right before I started my keto journey, right? So this guy's making fun of me. I can see what he's looking at, right? I'm petting the elephant. I'm thinking, wow, I'm doing the ADA's recommended diet. My wife is making me green shakes every morning. I'm working out 6 days a week, and I keep gaining weight. So I keep thinking, is it stress? What is it that's causing this? Why is it that I'm doing everything right, and all my patients, who I think are lying to me, maybe they're doing the same thing I'm doing. So this is me in Guatemala. I've done a lot of medical mission trips, short term, like 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. So these two guys that are with me were two doctors, and you can see how fit these guys were. So we were gonna hike a volcano one day. And so it was the first time in my life where the guide looked at me and goes, you need a horse. You're not gonna make it. And I said, what do you mean I'm not gonna make it? I played football, I'm an athletic guy. So you're not gonna make it. And if I have to go halfway up the volcano and come back and get a horse for you, I'm charging you double. I'm like, you know what? I'll die first on this side of on the volcano. Luckily, I made it up the volcano, right? But you could see my shirt was pulling at the buttons, and it's really, it's embarrassing. So that's it. I'm going low carb. What do? I get back. I was influenced by one of my patients, and this is why it's so important to listen to what other people are doing. So I see a guy, he lost 40 pounds. I said, okay, what are you doing? He goes, you're not gonna like it. I said, what are you doing? It's called the fast diet. I go, I don't like the fast diet. There's no such thing as a fast diet. You can only lose so much weight a week. So it turns out he was fasting on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the other days he was basically eating whenever he wanted. And I said, well, if you fast on Tuesday, you must be starving on Wednesday and eat twice as much. He said, no. The weird thing is I'm not hungry. So I went down this path, right? Of course, Jason Fung. I look at his video and I see him talking. I go, I wonder what this guy's selling, And at the end, he said, I'm not selling anything. I'm just saying this is what works for people. And he's talked about insulin resistance. So then I started looking at this area of medicine that I'd never looked at before. So I started doing strict stuff, cut out the processed foods, worked out regularly, and I was rewarded with this. And you can tell this is my old office. I scribbled out someone's, I don't know if that was personal information or not, so I just wanted to be safe. But I get this hive. I've never had allergies, never had asthma, never had anything. So it progressed. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I get hives all over my body, like face, so I'm like, this is weird. Maybe the ketogenic diet's not a good thing for me. Maybe I'm releasing toxins or something else weird's going on. Then I started getting this rash on my hand, and I was out to dinner with a friend, and his wife looked at my hand and said, hey, have you ever been checked for mold? I said, mold, why? She goes, you have a mold allergy. She said, I almost died. She was working for a major university, and she started having what they call panic attacks. They sent her to 2 psychiatrists, psychologists, and they thought she was actually having her airways closed because of the mold in the building. They ultimately figured it out, but she was intubated ultimately. She goes, don't mess around with this, you gotta get it figured out. So all of a sudden I'd have hot coffee in my lip. That's my daughter, the supportive daughter making fun of her own dad. So now we're all close friends because no one sees these pictures except you all, right? Now all YouTube sees it. But this is what started happening. I was Angelina Jolie at one day, and then The Godfather the next day. But this was ongoing, and I was trying to figure out what in the heck's going on. So that's me at my office. Brutal. You got to see patients. Guess what? I lived on prednisone for 2 years, basically. I was just doing that to work. And you can see all these pictures were in my old office. And I think that will tie. So I go to Low Carb San Diego, and who's there? Dr. Westman and a bunch of panelists. So I get up there, and I say, I'm going to ask these guys a question. So I say, Dr. Westman, can you get hives and all this facial swelling and all this weird stuff from a ketogenic diet? It's going to be a side effect from ketosis or weight loss, releasing toxins or something like that? Should I liberalize my carbs a bit? What do I do in this situation? And basically they said, Brian, if you want sugar, go and have it. You don't have to make an excuse, right? I'm like, I don't think I'm making an excuse. But all the panelists looked at each other and they go, this is not from a ketogenic diet. And no one had seen it. So I'm like, if no one's has seen this, I must be a huge outlier. So ultimately I went, as my friend's wife told me, and said, get evaluated. So I went and got tons of food allergy panels because I knew, like we were out, the first time it happened, we were in Big Bear on vacation, and all of a sudden I go, I think I got bit by something, and my lips swelled up like crazy, right? And it turns out wine, cheese, almonds, pecans, all these stuff on the low-carb diet were causing this to happen. So I said, that's kind of weird. So anyways, I went in and got a food allergy panel, so they stuck me with all this stuff, right? You can see all those fun needles. I'm like, seriously, gotta do all this? Isn't there a better way to do this? But ultimately, he sat down with me and said, Brian, I got a bad news for you. I said, what am I allergic to? He said, nothing. I said, how can I be allergic to nothing? And he goes, I think it might be a mold allergy, right? So ultimately, when I was at Low Carb Denver, as a matter of fact, feeling great, I never had any problems when I was in Guatemala jungles, Vietnam, El Salvador, nothing. In my office, I would get in 10 minutes after returning from a trip. So I don't think I can get the pointer out that way, but that stuff that you see, you could see the rust there, and that was the ceiling tiles above my office when they looked in there. And that's supposed to be pink fiberglass. It's not quite pink anymore. That stuff that looks like an animal is pink. And you can see all the metal was totally rusted. So this is a process that was going on for a while. So I thought, why am I susceptible? Well, at that time, I was working 16-hour days, stressed out, running around like an idiot, next patient, 50 patients a day or whatever, 25 patients a day. And so I just put this here to say, look, I survived that stuff, and I still have my high school sweetheart, but I was able to wear my Letterman's jacket, right, last year because we had an 80s get-together party. So the take-home message, buy your jacket really big if you're in high school so that you can impress your friends down the road. But really, I started looking at the elephant in the room, which was stress, right? I started looking at it, and I've noticed this. So there's a lot of things. My job, I'm not a scientist like Dave, so my job is to observe and see, like, why am I seeing this? And so many times you'll hear Tro and I talk about on the podcast, it's like we're seeing something, but we don't know why, but we're seeing it. So what's the effect of stress? This is my hardest patient, middle-aged. You're a real estate agent, you're stressed all the time. While we're having our consults, you're typing on the computer, sending emails, go, hold on, doc, I'll be right with you, right? Did you prepare your food for the week? No, I don't have time, I'm too stressed, I got it. So I started seeing this for sure correlation. Everyone I talk to says, what's the biggest killer? Stress. Number 2 is lack of family support, right? So this, when you're a single mom, you got all, it really makes it tough for sure. Even eating keto and low carb and carnivore, and they're still struggling. You go, why are they struggling so much more than somebody who doesn't care about it? They go, oh, I lost 5 more pounds, big deal, right? It's amazing. So part of this is being Zen. Most of us are caregivers. So we worry about everyone else before ourselves. And so this is a continuous glucose monitor on one of my patients who's a nurse practitioner. So you can see this is where she's running right now, around 100, 90 to 100 are normal. Hopefully you can see that okay on your end. So that's on Friday. Here she is on Saturday. So I'm looking at this tracing and going, wait a minute, this is weird. You usually run around 90 to 100. Now you're running 160, 180 all day long. And then you have this huge spike right here. I said, what happened? What was going on that day? So anyone have a guess? She was fasting, and she had to give a talk. So right here is where her talk started. Right here's where her talk ended, right? And I've done this before, talking to people. I check my continuous glucose monitor and go, what the heck, my sugar's through the roof. But even if you're not nervous, just being excited about something or passionate about something, you can spike your sugars like this. So all day she was like that. Then look at that trailing down right after she finished her talk. And the next day, her sugars were lower than normal the entire day, right? Even eating low carb. That, by the way, that top tracing, it was not fasting. She was eating her normal low carb diet. So I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. And she was struggling with weight loss too. So there's another guy, one of my patients, who came to me as a type 2 diabetic on meds. We got him off his meds. He's doing well. He's not super overweight, but he's metabolically sick still. So anyways, he's doing great. He happens to be a CFO of a major corporation who 24/7 phone, text, call. And he said, guys, look, I just had my new grandson. I'm going to New Mexico. Don't bug me for 10 days, right? If the place burns down, I don't want to know about it for 10 days. So what did he do here? He flew into New Mexico. Yo quiero Taco Bell, right? His family goes, look, we're too busy, and he doesn't eat Taco Bell. The tracing below that is what he normally runs, like 90 to 100, kind of like my other patient. And I was like, man, 4 hours up, and it dipped and did crazy stuff. And he goes, I didn't even enjoy it, but that's what they were having, and I just joined them, right? So the next one here is a little bit of chips and salsa, carne asada, and a chili relleno, right, the next day. The day after that, that big spike you see on the bottom was exercise. So that was a good thing. So he said, I'm going to be pretty good today. He knew he blew it the day before. So just to give you an idea, exercise, not all spikes are bad on a continuous glucose monitor. He's releasing sugar for him to burn, and we see that quite frequently. So that's another thing that can raise it up. And then those 2 little bumps, he had dinner, and then he had a little dessert. Someone made cookies or something that they said he had to try it. So the next day, right, biscuits and gravy for breakfast, right? Goes at 256, and he basically said, oh, crap, I'm not going to do that again. And this is why I like the continuous glucose monitor, because he could see it. He doesn't need me to tell him. He told me, oh, my gosh, wait till you see what happened on Wednesday, right? And then they had dinner that night, went out again. The next day, he said, okay, I got to get back on track. So what does he have for breakfast? Eggs, bacon, and avocado, right? Look at that, how flat that is. So he didn't get that huge spike that he would have got if he would have had that same breakfast again. And then that night, he did great. He goes, okay, I'm going to have a protein bowl. And they said, just like yesterday, we were at the salt mine, and they said, you got to try the sweet potato fries, right? So he tried the sweet potato fries, and it spiked his sugars again. So this is 10 days of this. So what were the net results for this guy? 10 days vacation, seeing his grandkid, away from his stressful job, less weights. He did some walking. He goes, Brian, I wasted time. I was just sitting there playing games, and we were laughing about dumb stuff we did as kids and all this stuff. Spent time with his friends and family, laughed more than usual, got away from the computer, cell phone, all that. In 10 days, he lost 8.8 pounds eating like that. So when we say it's all about diet, it's not just about that. There's other factors playing a role, right? So there's a great paper I read, great brain-gut microbiome interactions in obesity and food addiction. I think it's really worth reading this. It's a long paper. But in a nutshell, basically what they were saying, we have a bidirectional communication from our gut to our brain, right? So the brain will tell the gut what to do sometimes when you get stressed and you have to go to the bathroom, right? Different things like that. And then also the gut's going to tell your brain what to do. So people who struggle with obesity, a lot of times they're going to have this highly palatable food. They want to have more. So their friend could have one cookie and they're happy. Now they need 5 cookies to get the same effect. So there's an effect of this chronic barraging of our system with sugar, which spikes the dopamine, where you need more and more to get the same effect. You know, it's like alcohol. If someone drinks 12 beers a day and they come over and you give them one, they're not going to be really happy. They're like, this does nothing for me. But if they haven't had a drink in a year, then all of a sudden one drink will do it for them. So there's definitely data showing this, that you're going to crave those foods, and it's going to obsess your brain a lot more. Short-chain fatty acids are made by the gut microbiome, and there's tons of research on this. And I would challenge anyone, just go look at gut microbiome and then fill in whatever you want. And there's study after study showing this, that us Western guys thought were crazy, crazy information. You think this is all, hocus pocus stuff. But these short-chain fatty acids tell your brain that you have satiety. Because really, ultimately, we're looking for satiety, where we don't have to eat everything in the world. We say, okay, that's enough, I'm good, right? And not overstuff ourselves. So there's a huge influence of the vagal nerve on satiety pathways. Here's a huge thing that they showed in their studies. They went back and say, okay, is it genetic? Does it just run in the family? They said it was mom's stress when she was pregnant. A lot of us use the Yale food addiction scale, and we say, okay, early childhood trauma highly correlated with obesity, but why? Right? So was mom stressed when she was pregnant? Was she a single mom, financially insecure? And this may bleed over more into our inner cities where we have a huge obesity rate. Could that be contributing, right? This early childhood stress, financial insecurity. Did mom eat a lot of processed food? C-section versus vaginal birth. These are things I never even considered. Vaginal birth, lower incidence of all these problems as we get older. Food addiction, diabetes, obesity. C-section, you don't get the vaginal microbiome. Breastfed versus bottle fed, right? A lot of us are saying, okay, let's just bottle feed. And there's a huge difference in outcomes as we get older. And again, it has to do with the gut microbiome, at least as a partial cause. Stressful home environment, early childhood trauma, we all know that, going through a divorce, going through those things. That picture of me as a middle schooler, my parents were divorced, I'd go home and we'd have snacks and play video games, right? It wasn't, you weren't eating healthy and we didn't know. And back then it was the Entenmann's cakes and all that we thought if it's low fat, you could have as much as you want, right? So trauma, antibiotic use is a huge one. The more antibiotics you took as a kid, the more likely you have obesity. I just have a patient that I saw, new to me. She's a law enforcement officer, been thin her whole life, and all of a sudden she gains 80 pounds over the last 3 or 4 years. I said, what happened? That's unusual to happen. So I said, did you go through a divorce, stress, what happened? And she said, no, I got sick and it must have done something to me. But she was on antibiotics for 3 months, right, for a stomach infection. And after that, she can't lose weight. So maybe the gut microbiome is playing a role in this. And then also as a kid, was food a reward? Was it like, oh, you had a hard day, here's a cookie. Oh, you passed your test, here, let's go out to dinner tonight. And all those things, that frontal part of the brain. Adult stress, poor sleep, all these things play a role. Common denominator, all these things that they're talking about affect the gut microbiome. So this is from that same study. So basically, hopefully, you can see the healthy gut microbiome on one side has a thick mucus layer protecting the colon lining, and the other one with a food-addicted person, very thin mucosal lining, and a ton of, they're gonna have a less diverse gut microbiome. And they go through, and Dr. William Davis, I mentioned him, there's a ton of different microbiome. If you're missing it, let's say you're missing this and this, Parkinson's. You're missing this and this, lupus. And it's incredible when they go back and look at the effects. And so on one side, you see you have a thick mucus layer. You basically have Teflon coating everything, all the toxins from these bacteria. And remember, these bacteria are dying off. And they give off something called a lipopolysaccharide. which is highly correlated with inflammation in the joints, depression, anxiety, stress, not sleeping, and as you say, uh-oh, we start getting into the cycle. So you really want to protect that gut microbiome. Very interesting, there's different ones that, Lactobacillus rhodori, for instance, it helps you to make oxytocin in your brain. It communicates to the brain, and oxytocin helps us to communicate better, to hear your side of the story, to have compassion. As a matter of fact, with kids with autism, they have very low levels of this. So maybe so when they replace it, they're seeing that they're socially less awkward and that they can interact better with people. So there's a lot of stuff like that we don't really think about, but diet plays a role in shaping the gut microbiome also. So basically the thing I think they left out of this study, you can kind of look at it yourself, but they're showing how we can change these things. And the thing they leave out is carnivore, low carb, and what we're talking about. They're saying, look, you could take drugs that can change the gut microbiome, and they can. Surgery, and this may have to do with gastric bypass or balloon. It does change the gut microbiome for a while because you're fasting for a while, and then you're eating, you can only eat so much. But what happens when you go back to drinking soda and having chips and crackers and stuff and stretching that out? Is that why we have, we lose our remission, we start gaining weight again? And then there's drugs that can affect the satiety hormones and all that. So here's another one. This was a huge one. Dave mentioned I'm glad he mentioned that about colitis. On our podcast, we interviewed a guy named Brett Ender, and he had severe colitis, and his story is public. Severe colitis as a college, highly recruited pitcher, but then he got to college stress, going out drinking with his buddies, trying to keep his scholarship, trying to keep his grades up, girl problems, whatever. Then all of a sudden he says, I'm going to the bathroom like 10 times a day. And then ultimately it was 30 times a day with blood. And he said it was so crazy. And then ultimately he went on a drug called Remicade. He brought his symptoms like 90% better, but he still couldn't function. You think he couldn't go on a date, right? Because he would leave the table 10 times during a meal, and they think, his date would think he was on drugs or something. So ultimately, his doctor never talked to him about nutrition, and he comes across Sean Baker and says, I'm gonna try carnivore and see what happens. Within 3 months, he's off all meds, right? It's insane. And I'm thinking, how can this be? So that's why I started looking at this gut microbiome and saying, could it be that he just screwed up his gut microbiome so bad with stress and not sleeping and all these bad things we know about that can have an effect? So I was like, what can chronic stress do? So, mice, right? So the happy mouse in the overalls, they took 30 mice and they put them into two groups. One group, they're over listening to Bob Marley, relaxing on the beach, whatever they do with that, make mice happy, smells like cheese the whole time. The other 30, they put them in a stressful environment. Cats chasing them, lights, sirens, they can't sleep at night, loud sounds, and they're scared the whole time for 30 days. So they bring them back together and they say, okay, let's give them this dextrans sulfate sodium DSS. What happens to the healthy ones? Nothing. Had no effect. All of the sick ones, the ones who are stressed out, got colitis. And they said, well, that's interesting. And they looked and they said, okay, what is it? Their stress hormones were totally different. That lining that we talked about in the gut was gone, and their gut microbiome was terrible. The other one had like rose gardens growing in their colon. They look great. So then what they did is they got the healthy gut, and they took some of the stool, the gut microbiome out, and they gave it to the sick one. And the sick one got healthy. So they said, okay, let's take some gut microbiome out of the one with colitis and put in the healthy one and see what happens. They got colitis, and they felt terrible. So it was like they were stressed out, but they weren't going through the stress. So it showed there was more to it than just the cortisol and the high stress. So it's like, well, can this apply to us also? So then what they did is they took the healthy ones that were left, and they said, well, let's give them a week of antibiotics, and then we'll give them that DSS again. And they all got colitis, right? So for us Western docs, we've been saying for years, the biggest advances we've had in survival are because of antibiotics. And now all of a sudden we say, like I'm giving you antibiotics just to be safe so you don't get an ear infection, right? So maybe we're doing some damage and causing colitis in people. And again, these were the mice when they looked at the same thing that we're talking about. No mucus in the colon on the stressed out ones. And then they have these leaking of these lipopolysaccharides. Interestingly, in practice, I've had people who, let me just tell you a step back. So for me, I said, why was it that I got so sick and had all this stuff with the mold where there were other people in the building? Well, they weren't there 16 hours a day or 18 hours a day like I was. May not have been as stressed as I were, but they were having little sinus stuff, little stuff, but nothing like your face blowing up like that crazy stuff. So it turns out I was watching a podcast and they were talking about parasites. And I was like, well, it's kind of interesting. And they asked the guy, how prevalent is it in the United States? And he said 70%. Like 70%. In Guatemala, that's all we talk about. We treat all these kids for parasites. But we don't think about it here. And I thought, well, I was in Guatemala and I've been all over the world. Maybe I picked up something. So I get tested, parasite, treat for it. Now we can go to our friend's house. If I go to your house and you had mold, I would tell you, I go, you got mold in your house. Like I would have hives and my face would swell up or my eye would swell up the next day. So interestingly enough, I tested positive and I treated for parasites. That night at 9, and since I left my old practice about 2 years ago, I haven't had any big episodes. I woke up at 1 in the morning, my whole face was swollen, my lip was swollen, hives. I'm like, I'm either allergic to the medicine or something else is going on. Talked to 2 doctors that I know who are good docs, and they said, you had parasite die-off. This lipopolysaccharide, if you react that way, you get that. If you get diarrhea, you get worse diarrhea. If you get constipated, you get worse constipation. So since I went through treatment for that, I go to my friend's house and stay the night where I would always get hives. I get nothing now. So I tell them, look, maybe you got rid of your mold, or maybe what I did changed something. So stress. So this is kind of what I think of is this. We're stressed, you're having a hard life, everything's terrible. And a lot of this is our focus. Maybe we make life more stressful than it has to be. Then we get poor sleep, then we have poor eating, then we gain weight, then we're stressed because we gain weight, then we can't sleep, and then we get into this cycle, and it's hard to, so basically we screw our gut microbiome through that, right? Because when COVID hit, we all got stressed out and worried and tense, and we couldn't do things we used to do. We couldn't exercise as much, so maybe that was a contributory role to what we all went through. And so how do we fix that? The worst thing you could do is having a stressed out person, and you go, hey, stress is killing you. Oh no, what do I do? Get rid of my stress? I mean, you can't get rid of it when you have it. So what do you do when you have poor sleep? Processed food, sugar, antibiotics, alcohol. I'm just the messenger. Artificial sweeteners are going to affect the gut. We always argue, does it spike the insulin or not? Does it spike the sugar? Well, what about if it's screwing up your gut microbiome? Maybe that's a part of it too. Lack of exercise. Exercise has been shown to make the gut microbiome more diverse. So if we're trying to do everything we can for these problems, maybe we have to throw everything. Because some people will do low carb and they go, I'm not exercising, right? And other people say, well, I'll exercise, but I'm not eating low carb. So we got to fix some of these problems. And if we can knock them off, we got to knock out what we can. So stress management, exercise will help. Eating real food helps. Don't smoke or drink to excess. Get sufficient sleep. Has anyone heard these things before? Right? Dr. Bickman, man, this guy had a huge influence on my life, right? I just got to go have lunch with him my wife and I got to go meet his wife, and it was awesome. But he knows his stuff, right? He knows his stuff because everything comes back to the same thing, because we could say it's about mitochondrial health. Okay, how do I get my mitochondrial health better? All the stuff Ben said. How do I get this health better? The gut microbiome, do what Ben says, right? So it kind of all fits together. And you go, okay, these are all things we have to look at. We can't just say, change your diet and everything's going to be great. Or just get a good night's sleep and everything will be fine, even though you're fighting with people all day. So there are critical things, and it all kind of comes back. And Ben had a huge influence on me because 3 years ago, I was at Denver, and I go to work out, and it's me and Ben. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And we didn't know each other at the time. And I said, Ben, if I want to live a long life, what do I got to do? And he goes, these 5 things. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm working 16-hour days, I'm stressed out, I can't spend time with my family, I'm not exercising as much as I want to, right? And you go, what am I doing, right? We have to make some changes somewhere. So probiotics, prebiotics, there's a lot of talk, and it's hard because there's so much stuff on the market, and some of them may not be helpful, but things like kimchi, fermented foods, sauerkraut, there's tons of data out there, and it's surprising how much that can help. Bone broth helps with the mucus layer, it does, and there's collagen. And so looking at stuff like that, so maybe, gosh, if I'm doing a longer fast, maybe I do bone broth and not just say, okay, I'm gonna white knuckle it and do it and be a macho, So there may be stuff we change. And the other thing that was interesting about this is there's people who, and Rob Sivas was the first one really to talk about it, and there's people who are carnivore for a long period of time, and all of a sudden their triglycerides start creeping up, their joints start hurting again. You go, is it possible that there's a, Actinobacter mucinophilia, I think is I may be quoting it. Yes, see, that's why we have the experts in the audience to help me out. Yeah, Akkermansia, right? It will start eating your own mucus. So what good is that? I don't want to do that. I want to be able to provide it some, and that's why it's interesting in the carnivore community, there's some argument, do I have honey or not? Do I eat organs or not? And maybe that is part of the reason some people will benefit more than others doing different things. So it's kind of figuring out what works for us ultimately. And William Davis, a really good resource. He wrote the book, Super Gut, but Wheat Belly he wrote years ago. And he started seeing the same thing. People would get better to a certain degree, and then they would kind of plateau out and not do great. This is huge. This is something that we're facing. Probiotics and prebiotics have been demonstrated to have preventive effects. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, depression, autism spectrum disorders, and many other neurologic and mental diseases. So this is something, and it's in its infancy, we don't understand enough, but we could say, what can I do to make it a little bit healthier, right? And they're also looking at schizophrenia. And you look at this, and this is what was interesting to us doing low carb and keto. We saw people were trying to treat their diabetes, and they come back and say, I'm in a really good mood now. I'm not stressed out. I'm not as tense. So is that possible that we're changing the gut microbiome to some degree, and that's having the effect? Lowering the insulin is having an effect. Lowering the cortisol is having an effect. And so it's not so crazy to think. I mean, the most heat I've ever taken, I think, is when Tro and I were noticing that people's addictions were getting better, right, on a low-carb ketogenic diet. And they're reporting it to us. We're not making it up. And they said any doctor who says that should have their license revoked, right? And I would probably argue now any doctor who says it's not should have their license revoked, because it does play a role, and we're seeing it clinically. So which is better, hot-blooded or cold as ice? Who's the group for extra credit? Foreigner. Good, foreigner, yes. See, we're getting culturally aware today. So hot-blooded, cold as ice. So this is an interesting why I started looking at this a little bit. So sauna, some people swear by saunas and go, okay, that saved my life and I'm doing great, right? And if you're stressed out and tense, it may be something to look at. I've added that into my regimen based on what I'm reading. Decreased risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, hypertension, blood pressure dropping, neurocognitive disease better in a lot of these studies they're showing. Increased nitric oxide has the effect of exercise, right? And decreased arterial stiffness. So we're all kind of interested in this stuff with hardening of the arteries and cognitive deficits as we get older. Reduce symptoms of pulmonary disease, COPD, CHF, heart failure, arthritis, headaches, immune function, migraines. There's a lot of data that's actually surprising. Then you have the Wim Hof fans, right? They're like, wait, you should be cold, you shouldn't be hot, right? But there's data on that, just deep breathing, stress reduction. All these things can play a role. So go get a massage and relax for an hour, right? That kind of thing, if that's what you enjoy. Or go look at the lake and chill out a little bit. Because so many of us are so driven that we forget what matters. We forget about family and connections. And that's why I started Life's Best Medicine, because low carb MD, if I talked about this stuff, they go, don't talk about that. We just want to know about low carb. How many carbs should we have? What should we do? But over here, it's like, okay, if you're a jerk to everyone, it's not going to help you as much. Right? So laugh a little bit, have fun, and don't take life so serious. And really, because I'm telling you, the person who weighs themselves 6 times a day loses less weight than someone who weighs themselves like once a month or whatever's good for them. Some people, like Dave, may like data. Some people go, I know the data, I know it's going to do this, and I don't stress out. But other people might catch themselves on a peak after you work out, for instance, may make a huge difference. Looking at puppies and all this stuff. But don't not give these guys a hard time a little bit, because as a matter of fact, when my dog that looked like this was a puppy, I was at work one day. This is before all the mold stuff. I'm like, my stomach, oh my gosh, it's like I have giardia, but I haven't been hiking. Giardia you get from hiking and camping and all this stuff. I feel terrible. Like, I feel horrible. And then all of a sudden my wife calls and says, hey, guess what? I took the dog in. She has giardia. I'm like, you're kidding me. The dog was raised on a little farm when she was little, and she was drinking water out of a bucket or whatever, and I licked my face and I got this stupid thing. I'm like, that's what it is. I do have giardia. But the treatment is worse than the disease. Flagel's kind of tough. I don't like that drug. So anyways, prayer, meditation, all of this stuff, people, that's hocus pocus stuff, right? And I don't care what it is. Figure it out. Like this guy's picking up women at his age, he's got the pick of the litter here, but he's out doing something he enjoys, right? They're doing Tai Chi, they're relaxing, they're taking it easy a little bit, not being stressed and running around like crazy. These guys, hey, if you want to dress up like a character, cool. Like, if that makes you happy, whatever, right? Right? Collect rock, do a puzzle. So these are a couple of my patients I just wanted to share. This is a lady, CFO of a major corporation, stressed, tense, running around, that. So finally I say, hey, why don't you chill a little bit, relax, go for a walk, take it easy, because she's the caregiver, taking care of the kids, doing all this stuff. So sometimes, looking at it and saying, hey, what can I do, right? And so she made some changes. She was, by the way, she came to me as a type 1 diabetic. They said, you have type 1. It's because her sugars were so high that her pancreas is not making any insulin. We get her, I'm gonna see her C-peptide, she's making insulin, she's been off insulin this whole time. But someone like that, they would have just said, yeah, you got, and then it would have made her obesity worse, everything would have got worse with time. So you look and you go, gosh, like let's evaluate and kind of know the patient and see what's going on with them. This is one of my guys. He works for PlayStation, of course. And PlayStation, to make their employees happy, said, hey, you have vending machines all along so he was drinking soda all day and chips, having chips. Like they would take a break, let's get chips, let's get a soda. So that's what he was doing. This guy, that's 16 weeks apart. It's ridiculous. And this guy would not, I couldn't get him to exercise, and he didn't really care about weight loss. He was, I lost 8 more pounds. He's one of those guys that makes us all crazy. It's like, it's crazy. Just by cutting out soda, that's what he did basically, right? Now he's working out, putting on muscle mass, and the guy's a machine. And the other thing is with this guy, over time, when he first started, when he would have anything off plan, his sugars would go crazy. Now he's like, hey, guess what? I had ice cream, real ice cream last night. I had something else, and it doesn't even show on his CGM anymore. He's so metabolically healthy, it's ridiculous. And that's where he wanted to be. Like his body wanted to be there, so it was easier for him to get to that level. And this is on a personal level, and this is why we do what we do. This is my niece. She has autism. And we were back at a wedding a few years back, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law said, gosh, she's terrible. She's acting out. She's causing trouble. She's gained a ton of weight. And so it put a huge stress on the family because she would throw tantrums. They couldn't go out to dinner. It was a nightmare for them. And so they said, what do you think? And I said, well, I hate to give family advice type stuff. So I said, you should watch this movie called The Magic Pill, right, with Jason Fung. And there was a girl on there who was on the spectrum of autism. And to see her at the beginning, she was like an animal eating with her hands and eating goldfish. And that's what my niece was doing, goldfish and Cheez-Its. And it was a horrible diet. But if they didn't give her what she wanted, she freaked out. So it was just easier to say, here you go, right, like we do with our kids. And so she was terrible. And then now, it was funny, we were just back there for Christmas, and she lost tons of weight. She's eating healthy, and she knows. Like when she goes and starts eating, like when they have other family visiting and they start eating bad food, she'll tell them, like, my brain's not good with this. Like she knows, right? And so she stops and she goes back and she does better. So there's more and more data coming out on the autism spectrum with the importance of like how candida, too high or too low, can be a problem. So it's not just like there's a magic pill, kill off this and you get better. But there's more data saying, hey, if we can replace certain part of the gut microbiome for these people and change the diet and change their stress and change their sleep. But she's hilarious because she gets her 10,000 steps a day, and because of her autism, she'll say, like, she'll get her 10,000 and go, okay, I'm done. Like, but she won't, it'll be snowing, and she'll go out and get her 10,000. She goes, I have to get my 10,000 because that obsessive part of it. But she's doing it. She feels great, and her mood's better, and her joints are better, and everything gets better, and you start looking at it from that standpoint. So thank you for putting up with my crap for the last 45 minutes or so. But, really, I think it's really important that we kind of step out and say, okay, when Dave comes up with something different, we have to analyze that and say, okay, let me apply that to my practice. Let me apply that to me and see what works, right? So we're seeing a lot of different improvements. And one company I'll tell you about, I have no financial interest in them, but I'm very intrigued for my patients and for us in the low-carb community. There's a product called Sugar Shift. And so it was out of necessity that we started doing things. This lady who was, did anyone hear the podcast on that? Life's Best Medicine? Yeah, I have a couple people. Come on, guys. No, I'm just kidding. So her name's Martha Carlin. She was a corporate baron. She basically was a accountant that was really sharp on numbers. Okay, your company's failing, so she would change all the numbers and get them what they had to do to succeed. She made a ton of money, had a huge house, and she's sitting at dinner one night and looks at her husband, and he just stares at her blankly, and he doesn't have facial expression anymore. And she said, something's wrong with him. And he was clumsy and dropping stuff. So she takes him to a bunch of neurologists, and they find out that he has Parkinson's disease at 44 years of age. And she said, I'm going to be a widow in 10 years probably, right? Looking at the numbers and how this thing progresses. So she resigns from her job. See, and this is Life's Best Medicine too sometimes. Resigned from her job, said, that's it. I don't need the money. I'm going to fly to every expert in the world. I'm going to find out how to help my husband. And so she flew around, and ultimately, everywhere she went, they said, the gut microbiome. There's 2 different types of Parkinson's, 2 different manifestations of Parkinson's. If they have this, here's what the gut microbiome looks like. If they have this is what the gut microbiome looks like. So she goes back and says, I'm going to get my husband evaluated. Sends off his stool, right? And so she's on a Zoom call with this person who's reviewing all of his numbers. And the lady said, don't tell me his history. Let me go through it. He's middle-aged. He's got Parkinson's, and he's morbidly obese. And she said, well, he's not morbidly obese, but he has Parkinson's. And she said, The lady looked at her stuff. She goes, he's overweight. No, he's not overweight either. He's a long-distance runner. Yeah, he's been a marathon runner his whole life. So he's carb loading, running marathons his whole time, like Professor Noakes used to tell people to do. He was the old school. So she started looking into it and said, well, and a vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease are also suffering with constipation. So she looked at all the data and she talked to the world experts and ultimately tracked down this guy who invented the bacteria that they drop on oil spills to eat up the oil before, to help get the environment back. And so she said, maybe he'll know what to do. So they start looking at all this data, and so ultimately they come up with this thing called sugar shift. So what it does is in the gut, it will convert fructose and glucose over to mannitol, which is a non-absorbable alcohol sugar. And it helps with constipation, helps with feeding the gut microbiome. So she started using that on her husband, and then all of a sudden she said, maybe my neighbor with diabetes will benefit them. So she starts helping people like in the neighborhood and all this stuff, and people start getting better. So if we're trying to get our body more insulin sensitive, we're trying to do this, so maybe helping with the exercise, helping with cutting carbs, we say, well, what else can we do, right? So I think it's those kind of things. We have to step back and look. And so her husband's still doing fine. She's helping community, and there's a problem that we have to fix. Like Dave's fixing a problem with cholesterol. What do? Is it bad or is it not bad? Do we worry about it or not, right? So that was the other thing. I saw Dave at my first conference. He was there talking to everyone and explaining it. And say, hey, look, go talk to your doctor, but here's what I'm seeing with these things. And so having some kind of, I think what's happened in medicine, we've lost our inquisitive nature to say, okay, I'm doing this, but it's not working. Why is it that I practiced for 19 years or 18 years at that point and never took a person off insulin, and within 6 months I have 11 people off insulin? It's like, it's crazy. After making fun of the chiropractor who says, oh, we're gonna get rid of all your insulin, and they were doing it, right? So I think these things, we have to have an open mind, at least saying, okay, could this be playing a role? What else can I change? What variable can I do? And I think sometimes just saying, it's not working for me, what works for Sean Baker, let me change what I'm doing, right? Let me grow a foot and see if that helps, right? Or whatever it is. But I think those things, but I think really stepping back and saying, okay, what matters? What's important? I think that's what we're trying to find out. What really matters? Like the speakers here, people are here because they want to help other people and they want to figure out their own problems as I do. So ultimately, maybe in the low-carb community, we say, okay, maybe we need few more carbs. Maybe we need a few less. Maybe you need more carbs than this person over here. So I think it's really having that individualized approach. I think that's what I've learned. Some people, if you're too strict, they're going to go off the rails, right? And if you're too tolerant and they say, oh, I have cookies every weekend, I can't stop, then maybe we need to address that more from an addiction standpoint. So Bitten Johnson, a lot of these people that I'm talking to really have a ton of clinical experience, and they're saying, okay, addiction isn't not everyone has addiction. Some people, it's just the way we were raised, or maybe it was all those antibiotics you took, or maybe it was just a bad upbringing, right? And that's how you deal with your stress. So I think it's just putting all these pieces together and figuring out for ourselves, am I that person who could have one cookie a month and I'm good? Or if I have one cookie, am I gonna have 30 cookies and be passed out in the backyard somewhere with a sugar high, right? So it's just like with alcohol or smoking or anything like that. So I think it's really finding that approach. And in closing, I'll tell you, one of my patients came to me first day. One's really hardcore, the other one's not so hardcore, and she goes, okay, doc, I'm not giving up sourdough bread, I'm not giving up this, and I was like, this is the first time we're meeting. You should be fired up like at the church meeting right now, and everyone's ready to go before they go down the mountain and have to deal with their neighbors, right? And brother-in-law. So I was like, man, this is the first. And I said, why do you feel that way? And she said, look, and she's a multimillionaire. She owns wineries and does all this stuff. She goes, look, I know myself. I could eat glass for a month if you tell me to. I could starve myself for a month. I could do liquid fast. She told me all the stuff she's done. But she said, when I'm that restrictive, on day 31, I'm eating everything, and I can't stop. She goes, but if I know I could have a piece of sourdough bread in 2 weeks, I'll do it. So the first time she came back, I'm looking at her sugars. I was like, oh, no, it's a disaster. Her sugars were crazy all over the place. But it turns out it was all from Orange Theory, right? Whenever she worked out, her sugar spiked. And she's done fantastic, and she's happy as can be. So for her, that's what works. So if I say, no, you can never have that again, right? Then her brain just wants that. And then so it's figuring out each individual person and what works for you. And I think that's our job for ourselves, figuring out, can I work out more? Can I get enough sleep? Can I not volunteer so much at church or at, a volunteer that I'm doing and be stressed out all the time. So I think that's a big, huge part of it. And I just wanted to make that impact of saying, yeah, it's not just about the keto. It does help for sure. That's one of the factors. But also saying, okay, how do I deal with life? How do I manage these things? So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lenzkes. Is anybody else's gut biome telling them that they need to make a few changes, maybe take some advice you just heard today?
I know
Joe.
That is the case for me. Hey, listen, I say all the time on our channel, like, I know my biggest problem is sleep and stress. It always has been. I'm a person who never slept well, and I'm always stressed. Maybe I should give up one of my 8 jobs.
Probably.
But it's interesting what he was just saying at the end and talking about, and this is something we talk about. this is going to raise some feathers, probably especially online.
Ruh-roh.
No diet, including the keto diet, will help you long term to lose and maintain weight unless you make it a lifestyle.
Right.
Okay? So here's the thing. People say, what's the best form of keto? Should you do? We don't like the word dirty, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't like dirty because we don't want to label ourselves. What's the best form? Should I do carnivore? Should I do keto? Should I do ketovore? Should I, paleo? What is it? And it's what he just said. Which one is sustainable for you?
Rachel Keto.
Or I like Nisha. Nisha says Nisha keto,
Nisha
right?
keto?
Whichever one.
Joe
That's why I
keto?
love Dr. Berry's term, the proper human diet. It encompasses all of it. For me, carnivore is not sustainable. So I can do it for a couple weeks, but I can't do it long term. So I'm going to find what is sustainable for me, and that's where I'm going to have success.
You know where we do have something in common, though, in this group? We all need a 10-minute break.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great time to take it, don't
Okay,
you?
wait. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, but I'm going to ask you go check out our sponsors, but I'm
Yes,
going
but
to
they're awesome.
challenge everybody with something. So the biggest focus of our channel, Two Krazy Ketos, is about community. 3 years ago, I guess it was 3 years ago at this point, we went to KetoCon and we noticed a community, and we're like, this is the first time we've ever seen a room full of a bunch of obese,
There's our people
sick people
here.
who were happy.
Yes.
Right? You ever notice that if you've ever been obese, you kind of walk around and you're only looking down at your feet and you walk. We don't look up at people because we're ashamed of ourselves sometimes. At least that's how I was.
That was my
And when we
life.
went to KetoCon, we were like, boy, you don't see that here. So we set out on a mission to build a community, and we truly believe, listen, you get outside of this room and you get away from the people who you know who are doing the proper human diet, and there's some negativity. There's
it's
some people and
hard.
family members and doctors and coworkers who say this doesn't work and it's going to kill you. So we need community. So I'm going to challenge you during this 10-minute break. I want you to find one person and exchange social media handle, phone number, text message.
PIN number to
Somebody-
your ATM. No, don't get that
Somebody
way.
that you could reach out to and say where they can go like, hey, if you're struggling, call me. Text me. Message me on Instagram. I want to help you. And we want to build the community, because if we can build the community in here, we can continue. As we talked to other people yesterday about, it's like one person at a time, exponential growth. If we can help one person and then that person can help somebody, we can just continue to grow this out. Okay? So